Hey there gamers, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about my top 10 PS1 games. The PlayStation console was a console that was very important to the video game world because at that time it was Sega Genesis and Nintendo, and Sony said, you know what, we're going to throw our hat in the ring and we're going to put out our own console. Screw you, Nintendo. Now, I was in junior high when the PlayStation first came out, and I remember I didn't get one right away. I got one just as the Nintendo 64 was coming out, and I wanted to get a Nintendo 64. That was the console that I wanted because I wanted to play Zelda Ocarina of Time, just like pretty much all of you guys. But unfortunately, my dad wasn't able to get one on Christmas, so he bought me a PlayStation instead. And what I didn't know at the time was that the PlayStation was going to revolutionize how I feel about gaming, because up to that point, games were just played for fun. And Sony and the PlayStation really revolutionized how stories are told within games. When you look at games today, I'm not going to say they wouldn't have been what they were if it wasn't for the PlayStation, but when you look at the influence of the PlayStation and the games on the PS1, it is obvious that it was a huge step in evolution when it comes to what games can be and stories that they can tell. So today I'm going to go over my top 10 PlayStation games and why I picked them in my top 10. Now, just a disclaimer here, guys. This is just my top 10. This is not the top 10. Everybody's going to have their own opinions. These are games that I played as a kid in junior high that are personal to me. There's tons of different PlayStation games. I'm probably not going to be able to have some of your favorites on my list, but this is my personal list. This is not the definitive list, but you can go ahead and list your top 10 in the comment box below. So without further ado, guys, let's jump in to my top 10 PlayStation games. Coming in at number 10 is Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot was such an awesome game. It was like the first real platformer on the PlayStation, and Crash Bandicoot ended up being Sony's mascot for a long time. It was created by Naughty Dog, and it was like a 3D platformer when that was really new at the time. And Crash Bandicoot, although it was hard, it was really, really fun. I remember playing the demo over and over until I was actually able to get the game myself. Now, the first Crash Bandicoot isn't the best in the series, but it was the first one that I played that influenced me. I actually think Crash Bandicoot 3 is the better of the game, but we wouldn't have Crash Bandicoot 3 without the success of Crash Bandicoot. Coming in at number 9 is Twisted Metal 2, which is funny enough because Twisted Metal 2 was the first in the Twisted Metal series I actually played. Not to say that this is like the greatest game of all time, but it was definitely one of the main things that you needed to play if you owned a PlayStation. Like, you would go to school and people were like, yo man, did you play Twisted Metal? Like, nah man, what's that? And it was like this giant battle royal game that we play today, but with cars. So it was like super cool back then just to be able to get in these cars and just basically just hunt down and kill your friends in a car. It was crazy. Twisted Metal was definitely one of those games where if you owned a PlayStation, you had to own a copy of Twisted Metal. Coming in at number 8 is Fear Effect. This game, a lot of people probably never heard of, but I remember reading in old GamePro books the articles of this game coming out, and I remember it was so unique at the time because I never seen a game with that type of graphics, with that anime cel-shaded graphics, and I remember like I had to pick this thing up, and it was like this 2-disc game, and the art style was just phenomenal. You play as this mercenary. It takes place in the future. You got to find this kidnapped girl, and it was the first game that I remember playing at the end where, depending on your decision, it has like 3 different endings, and I remember going back on my memory card and replaying that last mission over and over again to get the 3 different endings. The art style was awesome. I remember some of the puzzles in this game just absolutely drove me nuts, but this was one of my favorite games as a kid. Like, the art style and the gameplay, it was almost like you took like an animated Resident Evil and put it in like the Blade Runner timeline, and that's pretty much what you get for Fear Effect. Coming in at number 7 is Dino Crisis. Do you like Jurassic Park? Do you like Resident Evil? Put those two together, you get Dino Crisis. That's pretty much what this game is. I remember playing this. I remember seeing this thing in GamePro magazine, and I'm like, man, I gotta play this. It's produced by Capcom. Why we still haven't gotten a remake now, I don't know. But this game was awesome back in the day. when you go back and you ask a lot of people from that era, like, what are some of their favorite PlayStation games, like, most of them would put Dino Crisis on there. Like, it is literally Resident Evil in Jurassic Park, and it's insane, and it's crazy, and it's awesome. You're fighting T-Rexes and Velociraptors, and it was like the closest, and I still say Dino Crisis is 100% the best Jurassic Park game that we have ever gotten, and I absolutely love this game. Coming in number 6 is Tomb Raider. Now, the first Tomb Raider isn't my favorite Tomb Raider. I actually prefer Tomb Raider 2, but I put Tomb Raider 1 on the list instead because Tomb Raider 1 was the one I first played, and it was the game that kind of got me into the Tomb Raider franchise. You play that now is really, most of these games you play now, including Tomb Raider, the controls are really bad, the graphics are really bad, but what Tomb Raider did and what Lara Croft did for PlayStation was pretty big and pretty special, because it basically said, hey, look, here's a female protagonist. Of course, everybody liked her for one other reason. It's like you went on this Indiana Jones adventure with this character Lara Croft, and you had guns and climbing and exploration, and it was really, really cool back then. Tomb Raider was definitely a popular franchise on the PS1. It was right up there with Crash Bandicoot as one of Sony's like most appreciated mascots, and that's why I gotta put Tomb Raider on the list, because it did have a huge influence on the console. Coming at number 5 is Star Wars Jedi Power Battles. And I know that probably throws off a lot of you guys, but if you haven't played this game is absolutely awesome. Now, there was a Star Wars game before this called Star Wars The Phantom Menace, which was a game based off the Phantom Menace movie, but it wasn't really that good. So LucasArts decided to create another Episode 1 game and call it Jedi Power Battles, and it feels more like the arcadey style of the Super Nintendo Star Wars games, and I really enjoyed it. You have different playable characters, have different powers, and you relive the events of Star Wars The Phantom Menace. And I just remember being in junior high playing this game with my friends on couch co-op and just having a blast playing through this thing. I thought the gameplay was very, very solid. Picking whoever characters I wanted was awesome. Fighting Darth Maul at the end, like, it was really, really good. It was basically what I wanted that first Phantom Menace game to be, but I'm happy that they ended up releasing this one because this was a much better version. Coming in at number 4 is Tekken 2, and that's mostly because Tekken 2 was my introduction to the series. I didn't actually start off playing the first Tekken game. I started off playing Tekken 2 because I used to live like 2 blocks away from the nearest Sears, so I would go to Sears like every day after school and just play the Tekken 2 demo over and over on the PlayStation demo machine. And then finally, when I was able to get the game myself, I actually had a blast playing it with me and my friends, and Tekken was a great franchise. I actually think Tekken 3 is the best on the PlayStation, but Tekken 2 was the game that got me into the franchise, and at a time where we had like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Virtua Fighter, I thought Tekken 2 did a much better job just being a core fighting game, and some of the visuals and the storyline, like, I was just blown away by Tekken, and it was so accessible for newcomers. Like, you could jump into this thing and you didn't need to learn combos or special moves. You just go in and you fight. Coming in at number 3 is Resident Evil 2. Now, unlike some of the other games on this list, I actually first started with Resident Evil 1. Resident Evil 1 was a huge game. When I went to junior high, everybody was talking about this Resident Evil game, and I rented it from Blockbusters, and I was just blown away by it. But the reason why Resident Evil 2 was on my list and not Resident Evil 1 was because I think Resident Evil 2 took that cult following of Resident Evil and really brought it global. There's a reason why we got the Resident Evil 2 remake. There's a reason why Leon is one of the most fan favorite. It's because of this game. Resident Evil 2 really popularized what the first game started. The first game is great and I love it, but the second game took everything from the first game and amplified it. Instead of being in a mansion, you're in this giant city, then you're in this police department, then you got this train sequence. I just felt like the second game just really developed it much better. Like, the second game polished what the first game started and made it that much better. Coming in at number 2 is Final Fantasy VII, and I think everybody kind of realized that this game is going to be on the list somewhere. Now, me personally, I love Final Fantasy VIII and would love to have put it on this list, but Final Fantasy VII is the game that got me into the Final Fantasy franchise, because I used to go over to my friend's house every summer and he would be playing this game, and I would just sit there and watch him as he played this game for hours, and I didn't understand, like, what was the purpose of this game. Like, the battle system was weird, there was a lot of reading, and then finally I was able able to rent the game from Blockbusters and give it my own shot and give it a try, and I just fell in love with that game. And from there, I've been a massive Final Fantasy fan ever since. So if it wasn't for Final Fantasy VII, I wouldn't be the massive Final Fantasy fan that I am today. And coming in at number 1 is none other than Metal Gear Solid. Metal Gear Solid changed the way I looked at video games, the way I look at storytelling, the way this game plays, the fact that you can hide and be stealthy, that you can have alternative methods to complete your task other than run and gun or beat up your opponent. You can hide, you can be stealthy. The storyline is so complex. I remember just reading that booklet over and over again, just trying to understand the backstory. I didn't realize that there was 2 other games prior to this one on the MSX. I had no idea. I'm just reading these backlogs within the manual, and I'm trying to read like the back history of Snake and these characters, and I just fell in love in that world. And I believe this was the first game I ever teared up in. And I remember walking away after I completed this game, and I felt like I almost had like a spiritual awakening, because it was something I never experienced within a video game before. Because prior to that, games really didn't have much of a storyline unless you played RPGs. And RPGs at that time wasn't really voiced over. It was just dialogue. So when you play something like a Final Fantasy VII or even Final Fantasy III on the Super Nintendo, they were all text-based. Metal Gear Solid was the first time I ever played a game and it felt like a movie. And for me, I felt like Metal Gear changed the way games were made. Ever since then, games wanted to be like Metal Gear. They wanted to have that emotional attachment to you, to be able to pull something off that gets you connected to these characters and this game. I remember just beating this game and playing it again and playing it again. Even today, it's still one of my favorite games of all time. Metal Gear actually changed gaming for me as a person. Well guys, that is my top 10 PlayStation games. Now, I know I probably left out some of your favorites, and I know there's some odd ones in here, but if I was actually going to do my official top 10, like 7 slots would have been dedicated just to Final Fantasy and Resident Evil. So I wanted to give a different variety on these games that actually made me a PlayStation fan and what I felt revolutionized that console at that time. Again, my list isn't the definitive list, it's just my personal list, but I want to know what you guys put. Be sure to leave your comments in the comment box below. Tell me what your top 10 is, and until next time, as always, I am Robert Storms, and that's my opinion.